Okay, so get this. You've got two huge bitter rivals. They were actually born from the same company that got busted up by the government for being a monopoly, and then decades later, they decide to get back together to create an even bigger giant? It sounds like a movie plot, right? Well, that is the incredible true story we're diving into today, the making of ExxonMobil. So, here's what we're going to do. We're going to rewind the clock to see where they both came from. We'll break down the absolutely massive deal that brought them back together. And then, we're going to get into the controversies and the challenges that have really defined them ever since. All right, first up, to really get this whole story, we have to go way back. Back to their shared DNA, you could say. John D. Rockefeller's legendary Standard Oil. Now, this timeline, it's pretty wild when you think about it. You've got one court decision in 1911 that was designed to destroy a monopoly, right? But what it accidentally did was set the stage for an even bigger one to be created almost a century later. I mean, these weren't just two random companies getting together. They were basically long-lost siblings, and their reunion was about to shake up the entire global energy industry. So for decades, you got to picture Exxon and Mobil as two different branches of the same powerful family. But each one was building its own empire. Exxon, which came from Jersey Standard, got really good at the upstream game. You know, the high-stakes, high-risk business of finding oil and pulling it out of the ground. Mobil, on the other hand, the one with that iconic red Pegasus, they mastered the downstream side, taking that crude oil, refining it, and getting it to gas stations. They were competitors, for sure, but they were also almost a perfect strategic match. Okay, so now let's jump to the main event, that huge announcement in 1998, when these two titans of industry decided they wanted to become one again. Just look at that number, $73.7 billion. To give you some context, at that moment, this was the biggest corporate merger in history, period. This wasn't just a big deal for the oil business. This was a deal that completely reset the scale of what people thought was even possible in the business world. It was a massive statement. And this quote from Mobil's CEO at the time, it really gets to the heart of why they did this. This wasn't some desperate move because they were failing. No way. I mean, sure, oil prices were down, costs were up, but these companies were still absolute giants. This was a power play, pure and simple. They saw a chance to combine their strengths, cut a ton of costs, and build a company so big it could dominate the hunt for oil anywhere on the planet. And these were the guys who had to make it all happen. Lee Raymond from Exxon and Lucio Noto from Mobil. You gotta remember, they weren't just trying to agree on a price. They had to steer this thing through a total minefield of regulators all over the world who were frankly terrified of a new monopoly that looked anything like the old Standard Oil. So to get the government's blessing, they basically had to hold the biggest garage sale in corporate history. We're talking more than 2,000 gas stations, a whole refinery in California. They even had to sell off a piece of the Trans-Alaska pipeline. This was the biggest divestiture the FTC had ever demanded, which just goes to show you how enormous these two companies already were. They had to give up a small empire just so they could be allowed to build an even bigger one. And so, on November 30th, 1999, the regulators were finally happy, the deal was done, and the modern ExxonMobil was officially born. And believe me, its impact was going to be felt immediately, all over the world. So, did the merger actually work from a business perspective? Oh yeah, the numbers don't lie. In just a few short years, the results were just staggering. Revenue shot up by over a third, and their total assets ballooned by more than 20%. All that talk about efficiency and market power, it wasn't just talk. It translated directly into a tidal wave of cash. And this is the mic drop moment. By 2006, less than 7 years after merging, ExxonMobil wasn't just the biggest oil company anymore. It had kicked the legendary General Electric off the throne to become the most valuable company on the entire planet. An oil and gas giant was now the undisputed king of the corporate world. Now, how do you even run a company this huge? Well, they had to create a new kind of structure. They basically sorted everything into three main pillars. Upstream, which would handle all the exploration and production, downstream, which would take care of refining and selling the final products, and a separate, massive chemicals division. This was the engine that would let them operate with insane efficiency in something like 200 different countries. But as you can probably guess, when you become that big and not powerful, you also get a giant target painted on your back. And this new supermajor inherited a legacy of controversy that was only going to get more intense. Yeah, you just can't talk about Exxon without talking about the long, dark shadow of the Exxon Valdez. This was a full decade before the merger, but that single spill had already become this global symbol of corporate carelessness and environmental disaster. So when this new, even more powerful company was being formed, those images of oil-soaked birds and blackened coastlines were still fresh in everyone's minds. And so, from the second this merger was announced, a coalition of environmental and even religious groups got together to form Campaign ExxonMobil to fight it. They weren't just worried about another monopoly controlling gas prices. They were sounding the alarm about what a bigger, more aggressive fossil fuel company would mean for the planet, especially with the growing concerns about climate change. That line of criticism got a huge jolt of energy in 2023. A major study in the super prestigious journal Science went through the company's own internal research, and their conclusion, summed up in this quote, was an absolute bombshell. The company's own scientists had been accurately predicting global warming for decades. At the same time, the company's public position often seemed to question the science. It was a stunning revelation. And this table here really puts the scale of the company's footprint into perspective. We're talking about being one of the single largest historical emitters of CO2, being named the world's #1 producer of single-use plastics, and according to their own data, thousands of oil spills just since the merger. This is why the company has been a constant target for lawsuits and activism. It's just a huge, unavoidable part of their story. So, that leads us to today. How is a titan built in the fossil fuel age trying to survive in a world that's desperately trying to move away from fossil fuels? Let's take a look at how ExxonMobil is trying to position itself for a very different future. In 2022, they made a really interesting move. They completely restructured their business. And while, traditional oil and gas, the upstream part, still brings in most of the money, they created something brand new, a whole division called Low Carbon Solutions. This is the part of the company that's now supposed to figure out things like carbon capture, hydrogen, and biofuels. And along with that new division came a big headline-grabbing promise, a $15 billion investment in lower emission projects. Their official goal now is to get their own operations to net zero by 2050. This is their public strategy, their answer to the immense pressure they're under from investors, governments, and the public to change. And that really brings us to the fundamental question that hangs over ExxonMobil today, doesn't it? Can a company that became a global superpower by mastering fossil fuels truly pivot and lead the way to a new energy world? Or is it just too big, too powerful, and too invested in the way things have always been done to make that kind of radical change? The story of ExxonMobil is definitely not over, and whatever happens next is going to affect all of us.